All right, so here's the, I'm gonna not do any of this stuff, but just, I think this might be good just to refresh everyone's memory here. This is what a Django application looks like and how it's structured. So we have the client makes a request. The first thing it's gonna hit is the URLs. The URLs is gonna say, hey, you wanna go to slash students slash, new. That means you want to create a new student, right? Slash student slash new. So this URL is going to hand it off to a function, which is going to be in a view. Let's say the create new students function or something like that. And then that view is going to interact with models, which is going to, let's say, create a new student in a database. And then maybe grab a template from somewhere. That could be a form or whatever, and then send that as a response to the client. So we're gonna go through the entire process. We'll make something very simple, but we'll go through the whole process. So I'm going to start by creating a virtual environment. So Python -m venv. And I'll activate it and install Django. All right. So I have Django installed. I can create the project. So Django admin start project. And that will be, we'll call it students. Yeah. So I get my students project. I'm going to cd into students and then run, create my app, which let's say this is going to be, I don't even know what this is pretending to be, but we'll call it school. Maybe this should be reversed. Anyway, we'll create an app. So Django admin start app school. Let's do school roster. Okay, so I have this students project, and then I have a school roster application. Maybe I could have a bunch of other applications, maybe like a grades, I don't know, a grades application, or other kinds of applications. But here I'm just going to have the school roster. So I have these both running. I could just actually immediately start running the server. So Python manage. Well, let me make sure I'm in the right directory. Yep. So Python manage.py run server. Okay, so I get a warning telling me I have unapplied migrations because I haven't done any migrations, and there's a whole bunch of built-in stuff that's kind of waiting to be migrated. But this does work. So let's go to localhost 8000, which is where Django runs by default, and I get this, your stuff is working page. All right, so the stuff is working, but we don't really have anything specific here. So what we want to do is we're going to have a very simple model. We're going to have just one model, and it's going to be a student. And then our application, we want our application to be able, we want to see all of the students that we have. So if we go to one route, you can see all of our students. We also want to be able to see a detailed view of a student. So not just all the students, but we can zero in on a particular student. And then we also want to be able to create a new student. So we want to have those three routes, basically. So I'm going to go do a couple things kind of right off the bat. One, I'm going to add school roster. And I'm also just going to install, just for sake of convenience, I'm going to install Django extensions. All right, so I have that installed, and now I'm going to do all of my migrations. So I haven't added a model yet, and I could wait to do this. You know, it's kind of doesn't really matter. But I'm just going to go ahead and do it now. So Python make. You don't have to do make migrations initially. Python. So you don't have to do it initially. You can just do migrate. That's not going to hurt anything. Okay, so I get all of the default stuff that Django has migrated. Now the databases are set up. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to open another terminal. And I'm going to cd into students. And I'm just going to run the server here in another terminal. So the server is just going to be running on another terminal. So I don't have to keep turning it off and on. All right. So that is running in the background. And I have my apps all set up here. So now I'm going to go into school roster. And when you're doing this stuff, you can, there's several things you need to do, and the specific order maybe doesn't really matter. So you can decide if you have a particular preference. I'll start with the models. I'll create the student. And keeping this very simple. So name equals models. And then just for the sake of variety, models dot date time field. Auto now add. I'll just set that so I won't have to really pass it a time. So when something's created, it'll automatically fill in that field. So I think that's good enough for now. We could also, I think by default, it's a good move to override the string method. Okay, so that will probably give us enough to figure out what we're looking at. Okay, so we have the models. All right, so we've taken care of the back end here. We have the models. So I'm going to go jump over to the entry point, the URLs, and start working my way basically back. So I'm going to go not in the app, but in the project URLs file. I see that this is already there, admin. And what I want to do is I want to route any traffic for my school roster app to the school roster app. So I'm gonna import include, and I'm gonna write a new function path. So if someone tries to go to, let's just say roster, I want to send them to school roster.urls. So I haven't written this URLs file in school roster yet, but we can do that right now. So school roster URLs file doesn't come automatically in the app, so you have to create it, urls.py. So you can basically copy most of what's in here already, but I'm just going to write it. So from, Django.urls, import path, and then so by the time we're here, we've already gone through, so someone has already gone to /roster. So if it's just /roster nothing, let's say, we can route them to a view function that we haven't written yet, and let's just call it all students. So that's not, that doesn't exist yet, so we're gonna have to write it. And I know I'm gonna write it in views, so I'm just gonna import it now. So from .views, import all students. Okay, so I have that. So now I need to actually, so my URLs are now taken care of, right? I have actually two of them, the top level project URLs, which is gonna refer some traffic to my app URLs. And then my app URLs is gonna call an appropriate function in the views. So I'm gonna have to go to the views, and I'm gonna have to write whatever that function was, all students. So what does a view function accept?
The response. A request, sorry,
yes.
The request.
Yes.
Request.
And then it, what does it return?
Response.
Yes. Yep. So it will take a request automatically, and you have to, as the writer of this code, have to return an HTTP request object. That's what Django expects you to do. So we know we're gonna have to return that. So we have all students here. We have a request. The kind of standard thing to do is to use this handy shortcut, this render. So it will return render. The first parameter of render is the request object. We'll just pass that along. And the second parameter is the path to the HTML document that you want to serve. So in this case, our app is school roster / and we'll call it all students.html. And then the third parameter is optional, and that's context. I'm just going to create that here. Just an empty dictionary for now. Okay, so we've taken care of the URLs. So any traffic that needs to get routed to our application, we have a function in the views and we're calling it. And then this view function right now needs to interact with a template, needs to grab a template. So we're gonna have to take care of that now. So there's a particular structure that Django expects by default for templates. So within the app, we have templates. And then seemingly redundantly, another subfolder with the same name as the app. So school roster. And then there you can put this all students .html. All right, and then I'm going to use the Emmet stuff to just get something quick up here. So H1, something like that. So at this point, let's just make sure we have enough to have something that works. So client sends in a request. I go to, let's say, /roster. This first URLs, the app level URLs is going to get hit. It's going to say, okay, we've got a match. So I'm going to pass this request off to schoolroster.urls. Schoolroster.urls is going to look and see that it's /nothing. So just going to roster. So it's going to call the all students function that we've imported from views. All students is going to get called, and it's going to return this, processed HTML document, all students.html here. So we should have something that works. So if we try going to /roster, it's not. Okay, I'm going to restart this. Okay, so that works. And if we try to go somewhere that we don't have a route for, like /nothing, we get this error. You can go to the admin page, which is built in. But so we can only, at this point, go basically to roster. So that is working so far. Any questions up to this point? Okay. So I'm going to pause here for a second, and then I am going to go into the database and add a couple dummy students, just to so we have something to show for the
Can you
next
show
one.
the HTML page again?
Yeah, all students.html. So all I did was the default Emmet, and then I added this h1 tag. So there's really nothing in here right now. All right, so I'm going to go Python manage.py show plus. I'm going here, and I'm going to do first. I'll just make sure this works. So student.objects.all. Okay, so I've got a problem, and what is my problem?
Never migrated after you updated the models.
Yep. So I changed my model and I didn't migrate. So Python manage.py make migrations. Python manage.py migrate. Now I go back in to the shell and students.objects.all. I get an empty query set. So that's what I expect to see. And now I'm going to add some students. So there are two ways. So someone tell me one way of adding a student.
You could do it in the shell.
Yes. Yeah. So we'll do it in the shell. So there's kind of there are two basic. Yeah. So there are two ways of doing it. So if anyone just tell me how I can create. So I'm in here in the shell on the command line. How can I create a new student?
you can instantiate an object. So like S equals student and fill it
Okay.
in and then hit S save.
So S equals student, just like creating an instance of a class, right? And then need some keyword arguments. So name, Bob. And then we actually don't have to pass it date enrolled because it's gonna automatically take care of that. So I've just created an instance of student. So if I do student dot objects dot all, I'm gonna see Bob in there, right? Yeah, Bob is not in there yet because
You have to save it.
yes. So we have to save it. So S1 dot save. And now if we run that query again, Bob is in there and you see that he has a date enrolled associated with him. Okay, so this is one way where we create kind of like what we typically think of as creating an instance of a class right here. And then we call a save method to actually get it into the database. There's another shorter, like I guess, one step. There's a one-step way of doing it. Does anyone know?
Use fixtures.
Yeah, create it.
Okay, so we could use fixtures. So fixtures, that's more for like creating a whole bunch of students, like especially in a testing context. But sorry, Patrick.
I can't remember the full name, but it had create in it.
Yeah.
It's like
Yes.
a method. You can
Okay.
call.
So student dot object dot create, and then we can say name equals Jane, and that will create it in one step. So if we do student dot objects dot all, we see that we have two students now, Jane and Bob. Okay. We have two students. I think that's probably enough to get started right now. So I'm going to exit. All right, so now I have two students. So if I go here to all students, I expect to see those two students. I don't see them right now, so I'm going to have to add something here. So when I try to go to slash, whatever they call this, roster, how am I going to get all of my students? Jared,
You're gonna query the
how am I going to get all of the students?
You'll need to insert a query that pulls
Yeah.
the full list from
Okay.
the database.
Right. So I'm gonna have to make a query, just like I did here, right? I'm gonna have to make a query here. It's gonna get all the students. So am I allowed? Can I just? How do I do that?
I assume there's a method or a module that'll let you do that.
Okay. So we have right here in a neighboring file, we have our model. So how do we get stuff from one file into another file?
Or import.
Yeah. So we're going to need, just like here, we have student.objects.all. And maybe this is not obvious because by default, this Django extensions has done all the hard work for us, but it's importing everything, including student. So that's why we can call just student on it right there. So we want to run the same command, student.objects.all, but in our view. So we can import from dot models, import student. And then Jared, what's my next step here? I have student imported.
Run the query.
Okay. So how do I do that?
Just student.objects.all.
Yeah. So student.objects.all. And that's going to return a query set, which will, basically be an array. I'm going to assign that return value to this variable students. And then once I have the information that I need, let's see, Jim, what should I do next? So I have all of my students now. I have Bob and Jane, and I want to display them on my HTML document.
You can create a key and a value in your context dictionary.
All right.
So just, yeah, students, colon, and then students.
All right. So I think that should do it. So this is kind of a typical thing you'll do in a view is you're going to make a call to the database using a model. Then you're going to use that information to create some context. And then you're going to interpolate or insert that context into an HTML document, and then you're going to serve that up. So if we go to this HTML document, right now we're not prepared to accept any information from a context variable. So I know I just got through saying how unimportant Django templates are, but how can I display these students? Keep in mind, I don't know how many students. There might be, might be 1,000 students. There might be 1 student. I don't know.
Inside a percent for loop.
Okay. So we'll do here, and so students is our the students is the variable that we're passing in. And so if I start a for loop, what do I have to do in this?
End it, end
Yeah.
all. I mean, end for.
Yeah. So I'll just end it now so I don't forget. Okay, so now I have this for loop, and I can access each student object. And each student object has a name and a date enrolled. So I want to display both pieces of information.
You could just do like student.name if you use the double open curly brackets.
Okay, good. So I'm going to put that in a tag. So we can just, let's do h3 tag for no particular reason. And double brackets, as you said. And we'll do student.name. And then we'll just do a paragraph tag, and we'll do students dot, what is it? And date enrolled. And I'm just going to add a label here. All right. So now if I go here, I should get this. And if I inspect, I can see that I have the body, and then I have this H1 with all students, and then I have this pair H3P, H3P. All right, any questions so far about that?
Can you just say again how this HTML was connected to our views
Yeah,
through line 7? Okay.
yeah. So this render is kind of a wrapper around a couple other things. So we don't have to worry about the lower level details, but the templating engine is doing some work here for us. But all we have to do is pass it, give it the template and what we want to inject into the template. And then here, we just always need to pass on the request.
So that variable student is coming from 6, right? Or
Yeah, it's students is what we're passing. So this context object has students in it. So students is what we have, and then this is just normal for loop. So this is a dummy name that we're giving here. This we can't change. If we called this something else, or it wouldn't work, right? But we can call this whatever we want.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's one route. So we can go to the slash roster and get all of our students. So now we want to make a route where we just get one particular student. So we don't have to worry about the project level URLs because it's still going to be under this roster. So slash roster, and the kind of convention we're going to use is the number. So we're going to use the ID of the student. So it'll be roster slash 1, roster slash 5, whatever the student ID is. That's how we're going to know that we want to get a particular student. So we're going to add that path here. So this is a little trickier because we don't know, we know we're going to get a number, but we don't know what that number is going to be. So we can't really hard code it. So Django has a way to handle that. And that looks like this. So int colon, so this like bracket, and then int colon, and then we'll give it a name, and that will represent our student ID. Should I make this bigger? Student ID. And then you still need the closing slash here. This is just, Django syntax for saying you're going to get some kind of number and you can refer to it as student ID. Now we're going to write another view function to call. So not all students, but we'll call it student detail. And we'll have to import that. And we're going to have to create it. So we're going to get the request as always, and we're also going to get that student ID. So sorry, not there. So this is also going to get passed in as a parameter to our view. So we'll call it student ID. Okay, so I go to /roster/5. That means I want to see student number 5. So what are the things I'm going to have to do? So I want to go, I go to /roster/5 because I want to see student number 5.
So would you want to iterate through the student object and use a conditional to find out if the ID is equal to student ID?
Okay, so we could do something like maybe like up here where we get all of the students and then we can loop over them and check if the ID matches. We could do that. But what if we have, what if our application starts getting really popular and we have, 10 million users or, maybe students.
We'll want a query that pulls that specific ID.
Yeah. So we can, so we could do the first thing, but it's, it's more efficient to get specifically what we're looking for. So only get what we need from the database and then try to minimize the processing. Basically try to offload processing onto the database. So student, I'll just call it the singular. Student is student.objects.get. And PK equals student ID. So if we go to /roster/5, student ID is going to be 5. So student.objects.get PK equals 5. So we're not gonna do like error handling and stuff like that right now, but obviously you would want to do that. So we're gonna grab the student basically based on the route. And once we have that student,
Now we'll create a new context for just that student.
all right. We'll create an object, maybe student. And then we'll do the usual return render request. We have to pass in the request. And then here is going to be the path to the HTML document that we're going to have to make. So school roster / we'll call this student HTML. And then lastly, the optional context. All right. So looks like everything is hooked up except we need this student detail. So we can add that.
Hey, Chad, would anything stop you from just using the same template as used before, since technically you're only passing one, or just bad practice to do it that way?
Yeah, we could do that. It would just, so the way we're doing it, it's, this is kind of oversimplification and there's some repetition here. We're creating an entire HTML document for every time. So over the next week or two, we'll see that there are ways of inserting templates into templates. But yes, you certainly could use the same. You could call the same HTML document from different views.
Okay, I wasn't sure if they were linked and you can only use one at a time. So okay.
Yeah. But we'll just for the sake of kind of conceptual simplicity, we'll split them up. So this one will be which one? Student detail. All right, so we have this HTML document, and we know that we're going to want to get a student. So again, we're not going to worry about error handling and stuff. So I'm just going to paste this because I'm lazy. So in this case, here we go. So that should do it. Refresh this, that works. If I go to /1, then I get Bob. If I go to /2, and then get Jane. And what happens if I go to 3?
Page not found.
Okay, could be page not found. So in views, so the first thing that's gonna happen is I'm gonna get the student ID. So my URLs isn't gonna care, right? It's gonna say, oh, yep, here's a number. We'll pass that right along, pass it to the views. The student detail is gonna take this in, and then what's gonna happen here?
It's going to query a line that doesn't exist.
Yes. And so what happens when you try to get something that doesn't exist?
Doesn't it come back none?
A 503? A 503 error?
So you
Or
might
error.
you might actually get a 503 error. It might result in a 503 error, but this will throw an error. So if you try to make a if you were if when you're doing something like this where it's a query set and it's an empty query set, that's fine. But if you are looking for one specific thing and it's not there, it will throw an error. So you have to be careful about this because you'll get an error, and if you don't handle it, then the application will blow up. So we're in debug mode, so that's fine. Okay, so let's go back here, and we're not going to worry about that right now. We'll talk about all this stuff more. We'll make more robust applications. So we have 2 routes going now. We have all students, which is /roster/nothing, and then we can get student detail, a particular student, which is /roster/5 or whatever. Okay. So the last thing we want to do is create a new student. But before we do that, I just want to, let's go back to 2. So here we're at 2, and I have to kind of actually go in here to the URL to navigate. So it would be nice if we could have some links here, maybe. We can add those. So if we go to, let's start with all students. So for each student will have its own endpoint, right? It will be /roster/1 for Bob. So we can add an A tag here. I'll just call this detail link. And we'll add an href. And we could do something like, what do we do? /, what was it? Roster/. Yeah, so like we could try putting this in. Let's try putting this in here like this. Maybe we do something like that. But the short of it is that's not how we're going to do it, because we don't want to hard code. We don't want to hard code a URL in here. So we're actually going to use a Django template function here. And it's going to be, oops, this will still have quotes. All right, so URL. And then, so this is, not intuitive, but so you have to have quotes here, and then the curly braces with the %, and then URL, which will be a function. This is and we're going to pass it a parameter. And what we're going to do is we're going to give it a named route. And we have routes, but we haven't named them. So we have these routes essentially, right? These are routes to all students and to the student detail. But this path function will take an optional third parameter, or an optional quarg, which is name. So name equals, we can give it whatever name we want. I'm just going to call it all students. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. Equals. So now these routes are named. So we can refer to them elsewhere in our application dynamically without having to hard code anything. So we can basically call this function using this name that we pass it. So if we go here into our href, we can say, what do we call this? One sec. Student detail. And student detail requires another, so let's try doing it like this. So let's check if this works. So we go to the main route, no reverse match. So we have a problem with this line, and it's saying, I was expecting a slightly different error, but we have to pass it in ID. So we need to give it, we have to go to /roster/5 or whatever. So student.id. No reverse match at roster. Where else? Students.
Wouldn't it be student.pk?
ID and PK should basically be the same thing, except in a couple edge cases that I don't know off the top of my head. The issue, okay, let me see here. Yeah, sorry. So there's all kinds of weird syntax things. This has to be quotes, I believe. Yeah, so this is, so that this href, like this has to be in quotes. So you have to have these outer quotes and then the curly brackets, and then this has to have quotes, and you can't have double quotes, of course, because the outer quotes are double quotes. So yeah, just how it is. So now we have this detail link here. So if we click on it, we go to, you can see Bob. And if we click on this one, we get Jane.
Hey, Chad, can you walk back where you got student.id from? A little.
Student, yeah,
Where?
right. So we're passing in, so this is the all students one. So we're getting all of the students, right? So we have the students object, which is a bunch of the students, and these are database, things from the database. And so we're processing students have names from our model, right? They have names, they have date enrolled. They also have IDs. It's not explicit here, but they have IDs. Django's
Okay, all right.
created.
So that the student ID is just referencing that,
Yeah.
and it got it because go back one to the student detail, or no, the view or that one, yeah. Okay, so everything else is being thrown in as student. So a student name, student data enrolled, the ID is just calling the ID number from the database.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I just didn't see it at first.
And that ID is the one that's automatically created.
Yes. Okay. So let's see. I think it's been almost an hour. I thought I would maybe have this wrapped up. So we two options. I can push through for the next 15 to 20 minutes, or we could take a break. Either way is fine with me.
I'm for pushing through.
Push.
Okay. Here we go. So URLs, so we don't have to hard code our A tags. We can refer to other things. We can essentially call other view functions instead of hard coding URLs. So that's a nice thing, although the syntax is a little awkward. So you do the same thing. So we have all students. We can also go here. So a detail view, we can link back to the list view. So I'll just say create an A tag. And then Href. And that's quotes, brackets, %, URL. Gotta have quotes around this. And this time we're gonna give it a named route here. So we go to our URLs, and this time we want to do all students. We're going to pass this all students. And there's no other parameter here, so we can just leave it like that. All right, so save this, and let's refresh. And we can view all links, so we can go back, so we can go back and forth. Okay.
Chad, can you show one more time the detail link, when you're creating that path in URLs?
Let's see, creating the path in URLs.
Mm-hmm. So you have, I'm just trying to see where the second part, like it knows to look for that student ID.
Yeah. So
because
we said that we're expecting an integer, and basically we want to call it student underscore ID.
So Django just knows if there's a parameter that it needs to look for on the other side when we're using the URL.
Yeah, you can basically think of this as like a regular expression. It's looking for an integer. So if you were to write this, as you wrote the parser for the HTTP server, you're gonna get some, essentially just text, like a string, bytes, or convert it into string, and you're just gonna have to chop that up, and you can grab different parts of it. So this is just basically a regular expression that's gonna look for an integer. I don't know if that makes it more or less clear, but
I think so. It just, if compared to a path where there wasn't like a variable, I'm not sure if that's the right word for it.
yeah,
it doesn't, it
So
just knows
let's
that
call
there's
this-
something else to look for.
yeah, maybe this will make it a little. So let's just change this route. Instead of /nothing, let's go to /all. So we go to /all, we get something, and if we go to we get this. And notice that even though I changed the route, I didn't have to go through my application and change all my hrefs, right? They're automatically updated. So here we have /all, and here we're expecting just some integer. All right, well, if that's still confusing, we can talk about it more, but I think probably just seeing more examples of it will help. So we have Okay, so we have our 2 routes for getting everything, getting the details. So now we want to create a student. So we'll create a new path here, a new route. And we'll call this new. And then we're going to write a view called, let's say, and we'll just go ahead and give it a name in case we want to refer to it later. And we'll have to import that. And then I'm going to have to create it. So create student. Request. So it's only going to get 1 parameter here, which is request. So this is going to be a little tricky because if I go to new, so let's say I want to create a student. So I'm expecting a form. So I go to /roster/new. What kind of request am I going to make, and what do I expect to get?
You should be making a post request. Or would that be if you were going to like put all your information in the URL with the question mark?
Okay, so I could use query parameters. There's a couple ways that I can send information, but let's say it's the first time I'm going there. So I've never been to this web page before, and for the first time I'm going to roster/new.
So the first time would just be a GET request.
Yeah. So my first request is going to be a GET request, and I think the kind of maybe the sensible default would be to serve up an empty form. So client makes a GET request, server responds with an empty form. And then when you fill out a form, what kind of request do you make? What method do you use?
Then when you finish filling the form and push submit, that'll send back a post request, right?
Right. So that's going to send a post request. So we could arrange this differently, but this route I think is going to have to handle both a GET request and a post request. So we're going to need to do different things depending on what kind of request we're getting. So we can handle that pretty easily. So if request dot method, so there's again, we could look at the documentation to see all of the different stuff that's on the request object. One of them is method. So if that is get, then we'll do something else, else if request dot method. We'll do something else. All right, so let's handle the GET request first. So I haven't been here. All I'm expecting to get is an empty form.
So return, render, and
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have to do anything with the database or anything like that. So request, and then let's do slash. We'll create a new template. And we'll get the defaults going. And then here we're going to create a form. So we'll see later that Django there's some more convenient ways of doing form stuff with Django. But we'll kind of, we'll do this slightly old-fashioned way. So we'll create a form. And then the form is going to have just, let's say, an input field. So if you put, oops, The type is text. And we can give it a name. Name. And we'll give it a label too. And then submit. So input.
Chad, quick
Yeah.
question. Is the label on the form, is the label on the input field, is that just for like accessibility, or what's that for?
Yeah, it's just so you can, otherwise you'll just have, you know, a box. So
Okay.
it's just a way of adding an element to the left of it, basically.
Oh, okay.
There's a, all right, and then this form, we'll give it an action. And the action is going to be basically the route we want it to go to. And just like the anchor tags, the Href, we're just going to send it to the add student. Wherever we're adding our new student here, which is, sorry, right here. So we'll add the URL, quotes, and then new student. And do we need anything else? New students. Yeah, I don't think we need anything else. And then for the method, well, it'll be a post request. That should be good. Let's try that, and then roster new reverse or new student.
I think it was called create student,
Thank
and
you.
you're calling the URL in the form action.
Thank you. Okay, so now I have this form. And if I create a new student. Okay, so here's one thing that has happened. So forbidden Csrf verification failed. Does anyone happen to know what Csrf is?
You have to cross-site
Cross-forward.
request forgery.
Yeah,
So
cross-site request for that. So Django, this is some of the built-in stuff that Django does for you, handles sessions and things like that. So this is just a way of ensuring that the request is coming from this particular user. So you have to include this, and the way you do that, Django makes it very easy. Csrf token. So you just have to have this in the form. Django will take care of the rest. Okay, so now I'm going to create a student. Okay, so let's walk through what happened. So I go, we can use this diagram. I go to my URL // roster / new, I go to the top level URLs. My top level URLs, the project sees /roster and chops that off and then says, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to pass the rest of you along to school rosters URLs. So school rosters URLs gets new, and then school roster URLs, so URLs passes it to the respective view, which in this case is create student, which exists here, create student. And that automatically contains all of the request information from, from my client's request, as well as all the other stuff that Django adds to that. Then in this function, we're going to check if the method is get, which it was initially when on that first request, then it's going to return this form, which we saw. Then when you submit the form, we make a post request to this named route, create student, which is right back here. So this time it's a post request and we're just passing. So this error is telling us the value error, the view school roster.views.create student didn't return an HTTP response object. It returns none instead. So we have to return an HTTP response object, which we can handle by something like this. So the typical, there are a few things we could do here. We could, a few things we could do, but the standard thing to do is to redirect. So after a post request, you redirect. So Django, there's another shortcut in Django for redirect. So we will return redirect, and we're going to pass it a named route, which in this case, we'll go back to all students. So let's try. Create students, go back to all. Okay, and if I go to new, get the form again, create students, I get redirect. So what's wrong here?
It's not updating with the new users.
Yeah. So the kind of the flow of everything is working, but we're not actually adding this new student to the database. So Anthony, can you walk me through, since you volunteered so bravely, can you walk me through?
So you said
here?
It's actually not adding to the database yet?
Yeah, so it's all the routing and everything is right, but we're not actually adding anything to the database. So where should we, where in this view should we start doing that?
Under the request method is post.
Yes, right. So if there's a post request, we've got information about the student that the client wants to create. So I'll tell you just, so we can actually access that information. There's, so request, there's that. It's actually a post, if it's a post request, there will be a post object, which will have, since we gave this a name, it will actually have this value there. So again, not intuitive, but you can look that up in the documentation. Where are we? So request.post.student name. So new name. So this should give us the actual name that someone has typed in. And our model requires at minimum a name. So that's easy enough. So once we have that name, how do we create a new student?
Just like in the shell, you
Right?
do what is it? Student.object.create name equals new name.
Okay. Good. Try that again. We're not doing error handling and stuff. Let's try this. We'll refresh it. All right, we'll go to new, create the student, and it looks like ASDF is there. So that's now working. If we go to the detail link, that works as well. So that's basically it. So so we've got 3 routes here, one for getting, listing all of the students, another one for a detail view on a particular student, and another one for creating a new student. So we start at the app URLs with whatever route we want, /roster. This gets deferred, or this gets sent over here. And then anything after that, anything after roster will be checked here. The appropriate view will get called. That will do whatever database queries or processing. It will call a view, and so on and so forth. Any questions? So just maybe some trickier things to keep in mind. One, you can name your routes, which is probably a good idea to do by default, even if you don't immediately expect to use them, but you can then refer to them. So you don't have to, so this is just dynamic. You don't have to hard code Hrefs or anything like that. So you can name your routes, and then when you have forms, you have to include a Csrf token in any form in Django, unless you disable the middleware, which you probably shouldn't do. And I think those are the major tricky things. All right, any other questions?
What does CFRF stand for again?
Cross-site request forgery.
Cross-site request what?
Forgery.
Forgery. Okay.
Yeah. I believe that's what it is.
Can that go anywhere in the form, or does it need to be the first thing?
I think it can go anywhere. Oops. Yeah.
Does that just get turned into a hidden input that has the token?
Yeah. So you can actually access this value even in the view. Request.post.student name. You can do print request post. I think it's called Csrf. Let's do this. Let me try just printing that whole thing. Okay, CSRF middleware token is the But yeah, this comes along as a hidden field, I believe, in the form. So the form data, it's writing along in the form. All right. Any other? All right. So the challenge for today is basically just doing this. So go through this, play around with it. You know, just try to play around. You know, just have the experience of going through in a somewhat guided, or, you know, very guided way. You can play around with things, try breaking it and then fixing it, and so on. And if you are bored with that, you can move on to the next day, Tuesday's challenge. You can start on that if you want.